Let's talk about Chicago, the Windy City. So Chicago, especially to Chicagoans, would be considered by some the capital of the Midwest. It's the largest city in the Midwestern United States. It is number three behind New York and Los Angeles, I believe. But the city it's still an important city, of course, but a lot of its traditional business has been lost. A lot of the original manufacturing. Sears used to be a major Chicago company. The Sears Tower is there. It's now the Willis Tower after the insurance concern took it over. And even if we look around Chicago, you look at areas like Gary, Indiana, which is basically a suburb of Chicago, has kind of really become a depressing story about how cities that were once thriving end up gutted out. The thing is that right now, so Chicago has this budget gap of over $1 billion, $1.15 billion, not budget, but budget gap. So they don't have enough money. And the mayor, Brandon Johnson, is trying to raise money, and he comes up with all these different new taxes that they want to have. And so now he's proposing a head tax. So what he wants to do is to tell businesses over 100, goes back and forth, 100 employees, 500 employees. So basically every business that is employing people in Chicago over a certain amount has to pay $33 per month per person to the city of Chicago for the privilege, I suppose, of being able to work and to operate in Chicago. It's interesting because as we look at former important cities that get hollowed out, St. Louis comes to mind. St. Louis they used to call it, I believe, the gateway to the West, and it was an important, thriving city. It no longer is. Nothing against St. Louis or people, no offense, but St. Louis does not have the importance that it had, let's say, at the time of the Gilded Age, or the time between the Civil War and the early 20th century. Other cities, Detroit is another example of that. They're trying to make a comeback. Pittsburgh has made a comeback. Pittsburgh is now a thriving city again, but it used to be a steel producing city, as did other ones in Pennsylvania. Bethlehem Steel was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and they lost that luster. But this it's interesting because there's this kind of and of course it's not simple. Of course there are things that have to be paid for. Chicago has unfunded pension liabilities. They have police settlements due to police misbehavior. But the idea of, well, let's just go in more money. Let's just go and tell businesses they'll pay for it. Well, what they do actually is they drive people away. They drive people out of the city. So these businesses, and Chicago is full of suburbs around Evanston, Illinois, and places like that. And even Champaign, Illinois is a little bit further away, but Chicago is surrounded by suburbs. And so all the businesses have to do is to move their offices out of Chicago, or maybe even out of the Chicago area. They don't think about these things. It's not like the business has to necessarily operate there. And then let's suppose businesses that are not as geographically flexible, so retail, grocery stores, and things like that. All you're going to do is to raise the prices, because if a store says, let's take a Walmart or a Kroger or something like that, and you say, all right, you have to pay $33 per head per month, in addition to all the other taxes that you pay, in addition to the sales tax that people pay, then they're going to say, okay, we just need to raise the prices of these products to pay for this. Once they do that, if they only do it in Chicago, which they're certainly not going to go and charge people in Arkansas to pay this head tax in Chicago, then the same goods become more expensive in Chicago than outside of Chicago. That does a couple of things. The people who live in Chicago are then going to go outside of Chicago to shop. If I know, hey, that Kroger over there in Evanston has a has lower prices than this store right here in my neighborhood in Chicago, then I'm going to go shop in Evanston. And eventually, due to these higher prices, people are going to move with their feet. Why should I live in Chicago when I can move over here where the cost of living is lower? And so that's kind of the folly of the idea that this mayoral administration has. It's kind of they call it progressive. It's kind of a leftist, really tax and spend administration. And instead of looking at how do we lower the budget, how do we, and of course, yes, it's not super simple. Of course, you have constraints and things like that. The mayor wanted to put a surcharge on homes worth more than $1 million in Chicago. And nowadays, unfortunately, of course, we do have a housing affordability crisis in the U.S. Crisis, I don't think is the right word, but basically it's true that homes are not, if you look at the gap, if you look at the ratio between family earnings or household earnings or what the median income or the average incomes are in the U.S. compared to the housing prices. I used to be a realtor, and when I was a realtor, we'd tell people, well, you can probably, there's a lot of variables, but you can probably afford a house equal to 3 times what you make. So if you make $100,000 a year, you can afford a house that costs $300,000. Now, again, that's an oversimplification, but that's a good rule of thumb that we used as real estate agents and real estate brokers and realtors at the time. Today, however, there are the house that you can get, and of course we have inflation and things like that, but houses are less affordable. You get much less house now. And if you look at the ratio of, okay, this is what the median housing price is, and this is what the median salary is. Let's say in 1990, it was 3 to 1. Okay, so if the average income in 1990, let's say it was $40,000, okay, then the average house price might be $120,000 in 1990. Okay, so that's the 3 times the ratio there. Today, however, that ratio is higher, so that's to say the average house price might be 5 times, I don't know the exact number, 6 times or something like that, what the median income or the median earner makes in the U.S. What happens now is that fewer people can afford homes. If it used to be that, okay, the average worker is able to afford a home based on median income or median type of job or something like that, that's no longer the case. People that are in the same socioeconomic strata find it more difficult to buy a home that so they're just less affordable. Same thing's happening with cars, but not as much. The demand for cars, of course, is a lot more elastic. People can say, I'm not going to buy that new car, I'm going to buy a used car. A lot of people who can buy new cars don't want to buy new cars. I have a problem with a lot of I don't want a car that has all screens and that doesn't have gauges, that everything has to be some kind of software update or something like that. I don't want that. Some people do. It's a preference. One of the things I saw is where the new Ford F-150, and normally I like Ford trucks, but there's been a lot of noise that the new car, the new Ford pickup truck, the tail light to replace it is something like $3,500. So I'm not going to buy a truck that if it gets into an accident or the tail light's busted, it's going to cost me $3,500. I've also read reports that if it gets wet, there are sensors in there, and trucks are supposed to be these heavy-duty things. But if this thing gets waterlogged or something, there are sensors that won't let the truck run because the tail light's gotten waterlogged. So my point is, I don't want to get off track, is that some people will make the choice and say, I'm not going to buy that new car, or I'm going to keep my older car or repair the one I have, something like that. Housing demand is a little bit less elastic, meaning that all of these other different variables affect housing prices, but people still need a place to live, and so they're going to have to rent or they're going to have to own a house. Anyway, in Chicago, they had a referendum that failed. It was called Bring Chicago Home, and they wanted to add a surcharge on the sale of properties that were more than $1 million, and people just didn't trust the government, the municipal government, to get a hold of this money, and then that they were going to spend it prudently. So people basically voted that down. Again, when you do that, you add to the transactional cost of a home purchase, meaning that, let's say $500,000, if I have $500,000 to spend on a house, whether it's financed or cash or whatever, it's going to buy me less house, because now I've got to pay this tax in addition to the cost of the house, in addition to, if I'm using a real estate agent, in addition to transfer taxes and things like that. So I get less house for my money. That actually makes the housing affordability crisis worse, and it depresses property values in places like Chicago, because now if I'm selling a house, then I say, hey, I can sell to this buyer that has this much money or this much income, but now with this surcharge, if it succeeded, which it did and failed, then I can't sell my house at the same price to that buyer. I've got to go and find a buyer that has more money, or actually lower the cost of my house. So it really hurts everybody except for the city tax collector. So the mayor also has tried to raise property taxes to bring in another $300 million. It was completely voted down by Chicago City Council. It was a unanimous vote. And Chicago is all controlled by Democrats. So his own party, fearing the wrath of the electorate, voted against that. So we have all of these repeated attempts to make the cost of living in Chicago even more expensive. It's not as bad as a place like New York or, let's say, San Francisco, but it is probably the most expensive place to live in the Midwest, certainly of any of the major cities. And the idea that this mayoral administration has is to make it even more expensive, rather than looking for ways to spend less money. Now, what you have are two, not just in the U.S., but kind of general, broadly, you have a choice. You can have a high tax, high service type of government, and that's what places like New York try to do. They have a huge government that has all these different regulatory offices and bureaus that control this, and you need a permit to put this sign up, and you need a permit to dig a hole in your backyard, and all of these different things. And of course, they're going to charge fees for all these permits and such, and create this huge infrastructure. Some people like that. If you like that, that's fine. So you have a high tax, high service mentality or philosophy when it comes to government. And this is at all levels: municipal, state or provincial, and national or federal governments. Then you have the idea for a low tax, limited service type of government. And this is more of a libertarian idea. Libertarians, the idea is that we're going to provide the basic services that are necessary that a government provides. And largely that is, it is in a sense regulatory, but the idea is not to create a whole lot of regulatory infrastructure that tells you, hey, your car can only be red, or it has to be this year, or you've got to use these types of this type of grass in your yard or something like that. The idea is sort of to protect you from your neighbor, to say, okay, hey, if you have a dispute, then we'll have a court system to settle that dispute, so people don't go and pick up clubs or knives or worse and try to settle disputes themselves. So you need to have that function. You also need to have a certain amount of public infrastructure. In my mind, this would be things like roads. I believe in having municipal parks and things like that. I believe that things like municipal parks should be provided at a local level. And of course, you can have national parks and you can have state parks. But some hardcore libertarians would disagree with me, or some people who maybe would be not libertarians, but anarchist or anarcho-capitalist, which is not libertarian. It is a kind of something beyond libertarianism, because libertarians generally do not believe in no government like anarchists believe, or no public property, which is what an anarcho-capitalist would believe, in that every road then becomes a toll road, or if you want to park, go make one yourself and you pay for it. That, I believe, goes beyond libertarianism, but you can, of course, have a debate with me or with each other on that. So the idea of a limited service government. You have an infrastructure, you have roads, you have a sewage system, you have these types of public things that are provided mostly at a local level. And then beyond that, yes, you have fire services, you have safety services, you might have the EMT or the emergency medical technicians and these types of things. But you have a lighter touch than getting into all of these different types of minutiae types of regulatory things. In these large cities like Chicago, especially the older cities like Chicago and like New York, you can't just go and build a building. Now, of course, pretty much anywhere you need to have a permit to make sure that the building's safe. But now they'll say things like you've got to have so many windows, or you've got to have, for example, one of the things that fascinates me is in when I visit New York, you see all of these fire escapes. And I think they're ugly, but maybe some people think that they add character. My home city, Columbus, Ohio, you pretty much don't see them anywhere. We have plenty of tall buildings, but you're able to create fire egress systems and things like that internally to the buildings, so you don't need fire escapes. My point is that in a libertarian philosophy, you don't have such heavy regulation. You need to have a basic level of safety. You have food inspectors to make sure that the food is not poisonous or people aren't serving gross and unsafe meals to people. One of the things when that I lived in Florida. I lived in Miami for 3 or 4 years. I lived in Miami and then for a shorter period of time in Fort Lauderdale. And one of the things that fascinates me, the local media does a good job of this, is they go and they read all the health inspectors' reports. And I don't know what it is about that city. All cities have people or businesses that violate the health code, but you get some really gross stuff that you see down there. And maybe it's just because the media does a good job of reporting it. I remember there used to be this Chinese buffet that I used to love to go to. My friend and I would always meet there for lunch. But then I saw in the paper that they got shut down because they had rodents and bugs and vermins and things like that running around. I haven't been back since. Not even when I go to visit will I go to that place. And I'm glad to know about that kind of stuff. But of course, we have these services like inspectors and things like that. And I think that that's reasonable. Again, you might find some hardcore super anarcho-capitalists who might say, no, they would solve this by say, hey, if you go to a place and there's bugs and rats and things like that, then just don't go back there and eat, and then they'll suffer and they'll go out of business. That, I believe, goes beyond a mainstream libertarian view, but there are people who hold their view, and that's fine. Let's debate things in the public square. Still, I think that keeping this regulatory infrastructure light by comparison to a place like a New York or Chicago. I would imagine Boston. I don't have as much experience in Boston as I do in a place like New York or Chicago, means that the city does not have to have these multi-billion-dollar budgets, because you're not trying to have inspectors out there regulating, hey, that sign is 3 inches too big over that way, or it's the wrong color, or your windows have to be made with 4-gauge aluminum instead of 3-gauge aluminum or something like that. And so part of the problem, I think, is that as government grows in places like Chicago, it becomes this Leviathan that you have to feed. And so nobody wants to cut back, and nobody wants to reimagine the role of government in these places, but they get into this kind of money addiction. And they go, hey, let's put a fee on our houses over $1 million, which Chicago is pretty much everything on Lakeshore Drive, and in all the nice areas of Chicago has some very nice areas with some old historic buildings that are residences, as well as some new fancy, not just high rises, but single family homes and things like that. But rather than going out there and saying, let's add more taxes or let's make housing even more expensive, or let's put a head tax and drive all the business out of town so we can be like Gary, Indiana next door and have everything gutted out. Then you have a city, Detroit has been kind of like this. They're trying to fix it. DC had gotten pretty bad, but it's slowly getting better. It looks like where you have this core of a city and you have thriving suburbs. Cleveland, this happened to Cleveland. So Cleveland had, which is actually kind of a small city, it's surrounded by suburbs, and then you have Lake Erie on the north, and there's no room for Cleveland to expand. And so all the suburbs are nice. You've got these beautiful suburbs in areas like Solon and Mentor and these different areas around Cleveland, up off of 271 and off of 480, the different interstate that 271 kind of goes around Cleveland from southwest to northeast. But the problem is that all the nice areas, all the tax generating areas where people have high incomes, nice homes, and they pay property tax and things like that, are outside of Cleveland. And then Cleveland is left in the center with this kind of low income, social problems, and all of these different things like that. And the businesses left and are out in these different office parks and things like that. So Chicago has suffered from this to an extent, but the policies of this current mayoral administration, which are very, very much high, it's kind of like an addiction to money. Bigger government, let's expand our municipal government and do more and more and more and charge more and more and more. At some point, and this is what's happening now, people are saying enough, forget it. Either we're not going to pay these taxes or we're going to leave. And so that is an interesting case study. It's in the news right now. I came across an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about it. Chicago Democrats feud over the mayor's proposed $33 per head tax, which will do two things. It will make products in Chicago more expensive at retail. It will make businesses leave Chicago if they can. Nobody wants to pay that. And especially when there's a choice, I can move and go out to Evanston, or I can go to Cairo, or I can go to some other suburb in Chicago, or not Cairo, that's far away, I'm sorry, Cicero. I was thinking of Cicero, Illinois, which has an interesting history, by the way. But either businesses are going to leave when they can, they're going to pass prices on to consumers, and this will also encourage residents to leave. Because residents, all these costs are going to be passed on to consumers. Businesses are not stupid. They're not just going to eat these costs. And so this is a great case study. And hopefully cooler heads will prevail. It looks like there's a lot of opposition to this tax, and it may fail. And we need to see more sanity and more limited government ideas take place. Obviously, not no government, not anarchy, but if we can have some sanity in restricting the role and restricting the tentacles, reaching into every nook and cranny of our daily life. So that's a analysis, I think, of what's happening there in Chicago. Let me know what you think. Am I wrong? Do you prefer a high tax, high service type of government philosophy, like we see in places like New York City, or like we see in places like Paris, France, lots of other cities as well that we can use as an example? What's your city like? I'm from Columbus, Ohio. Columbus is kind of one of the low tax, low service. It's kind of, I guess you'd call it, it's close to the center in that, but it's a little bit more towards the lower side than the higher side. There's a 2% income tax in Columbus, and some people prefer to live in the suburbs. If you live in the suburbs, and they may have changed, but I've been out of the city for a little bit, then you pay 1% of tax. If you work in the city but live outside of the city, you're still on the hook for 1%. If you live outside of the city and work outside of the city, like say if you live in the suburbs and work in the suburbs, you're not subject to it at all. So that's one example. There are many other examples. There are some places like let's say small towns or rural areas where right now I live kind of in a rural area and we're outside of the city, so we're not subject to those municipal taxes that are there in the city. And so what do you think? What makes sense for you? Would you rather see Chicago raise taxes and continue to grow the government? Has it gotten to the point to where it's too much? Or like me, do you prefer the libertarian approach where you have the government like I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said that the government that governs best governs least. I'm paraphrasing. It could be that the actual words were a little bit different, but I believe that was Jefferson. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. And so, e pluribus unum, out of many one, and that's kind of it is the motto of the United States, and hopefully we continue to live that. I think that creed or that philosophy is under threat these days, unfortunately, and that is why I've decided to share these thoughts with you. Make sure that if you like it, make sure that you like it, make sure that you subscribe, and hopefully we'll dialogue soon.